philosophie. Probably like this. Hello from Brooklyn. I was in Iceland. You will have seen in the first, I don't know, minute of this vlog in various disparate clips. I never sat down to talk to camera at any point during the not quite 3 days that I was there. So it just is kind of like a fever dream of couple-second clips. For me too, it's a little bit of a fever dream. It was a relatively spur-of-the-moment decision to go, and it was wonderful. I was just staying around, or in Reykjavik. I have wanted to go to Iceland for a really long time, and I'm glad to have finally gotten the opportunity to do so, and I definitely want to go back. I want to explore the countryside, which is of course magnificent. But yeah, 'twas great. All right, what have I been reading in that time? Not a tremendous amount when I was there, but I did read in the plane. You'll have seen me read Orlanda in the plane. I finished it in my plane ride last night. I read most of it actually then. I read like 2/3 of it in one long sitting on my plane ride back to New York yesterday. This I've mentioned in a big book haul video that I posted actually earlier this week, as well as Jacqueline Harpman's I Who Have Never Known Men, which I read in July. I really loved that book, and I also really loved this book. So yeah, I've been Harpman pilled. This, as I mentioned in the previous video that I did, is based on Orlando. No surprise with a name like Orlanda. So we are dealing with gender switcheroos and gender identity. It is a story about why can I not speak? Well, forever. This follows Eileen, who is a kind of proper woman of Brussels in her 30s. She's a letters professor. She has a relationship with Albert, and they have their adjoining apartments that they've joined together. And she just has this kind of cozy, proper life as just a woman of the 90s with good education and some means and intellectual capacities. When she is in Paris, waiting at a cafe, waiting for the train back to Brussels, she sees a young man, 20-year-old man, who is seated nearby, and a part of her consciousness leaves Aline and goes to inhabit the body of that 20-year-old. So, and that chunk of consciousness the author calls Orlanda, in an homage to Virginia Woolf. That consciousness is kind of Aline's masculine side that she has been kind of putting aside. It's also kind of her childish side. It's basically all of her prepubescent just elan that she kind of forced down constantly in her life in order to be a proper young lady, a proper young woman, and then just a proper educated woman. And kind of some little bits of chaos ensue. I won't go further into the plot, but obviously we're dealing with gender roles and gender identity, but mostly just identity. It's a relatively, I think, superficial vision of gender roles to a certain extent, and certainly it's a very binary one, which is not surprising. And it deals as much with, I think, just personal identity as with kind of larger social gender constructs and personal history. An interesting aspect is also how much it is about a personal interaction with literature and a literary opus. This is as much about, I think, Jacqueline Harpman's relationship to Virginia Woolf and Aline's relationship to Virginia Woolf at the beginning of the book. The kind of the conceit, the framing conceit is that she is seated rereading Orlando to prepare a lesson on it for her class. And so that is also very much about her understanding of Woolf, her annoyance with Woolf, or her digging into that literary canon, and also Harpman having a relationship to words and text. She is a presence in this book. The book is in third person omniscient narration, but also we do get the intrusion first person of the author kind of looking over the actions of her characters and commenting on them, sometimes in really funny ways. So it is really about a relationship to culture as much as it is to gender specifically. But yeah, it is translated into English. The two covers that I have seen of English editions are wretched, not good. If I have the courage, I'll put them up. But yeah, those two are not good looking, in my opinion. Sorry if you disagree with me. I am going to read next, I think, The Loft by Marlen Haushofer. I mentioned this also in my haul video, dans la Mansarde in French. Yeah, I read The Wall earlier this month and liked it, really liked it actually. So I think this is probably next. In a twist that is surprising to exactly no one, I feel overwhelmed by the number of books that I have in my life. Not just those books that I mentioned to you in my TBR, but just the kind of list of books that I have decided I was reading this year and monthly, and just everything around me. This is absolutely not surprising. I have so many books, so many plans, so I'm trying to not freak out about it because it's fine. These are not actually obligations. But yeah, I do, in my ravenous state, I also feel overwhelmed, which is absolutely not shocking. I have not made much headway on Clarice Lispector. 2 weeks ago I posted a vlog about reading The Besieged City, and I have barely gotten any farther on that, so maybe ideally I'll read a little bit more of that. I started the audiobook of The Wren by Enright at the end of last week, and I'm about halfway done. I may or may not finish that book. I'm liking it. The writing is beautiful. I'm not really getting into it, so I might, you could say, Sophie, finish that book instead of starting another book, but different media. And yeah, I don't really gravitate towards that book. I would rather read something else. So I think that's a relatively good sign that I might just not finish it, or at the very least, I'll just let it go to the side and start something else, and I may or may not get back to it. The current plan is that I have 2 other books in my roster, so we'll see. Okay, now back to work. I actually really slammed back into things today, so I have quite a busy day. So sort of out of a sense of guilt, I did not start Dans la Mansarde, the Marlen Haushofer, and instead did return to Lispector. I read a big chunk of it this morning, and I'm really glad I did. sometimes it's easy for me to step away from a Lispector. If you watch my channel with any regularity or even maybe irregularity, you know I'm a huge fan, and I have read and reread a lot of her work. And yet despite this, I also find myself wanting to put her down, physically, i.e. wanting to step away from reading her because I think it's such a sympathetic reverberation to a lot of the things that I think and am trying to deconstruct for myself, that it sets off too much creative power and thought process in me, and it's tiring. I want to be lazy. It's overwhelming, and sometimes I'm not ready to ride that wave. So while loving her, and actually not finding her that difficult to read, I have my own difficulties, of course, but it's not really because she is exhausting in herself, it's that she makes me exhausting to myself. So anyway, all of that aside, I picked her up again this morning, read about 50 pages, am super glad I did, and in fact, it got me all kind of caffeinated in my own right. I was also drinking tea, so I think it's the twofer of Clarice plus Tane. But yeah, I'm going to try to finish this soon. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm overwhelmed by the number of reading projects that I have. More so this morning even than I was yesterday. It's fine. I keep saying this. I say this often on this channel. It's fine, because I need to say it to myself. But it's kind of a funny, sort of stupid position to put yourself in. And also, well, it's just who I am. I take on too much and then I get overwhelmed by it, and then I do it. And I'm glad I do it. And there's some things I never get to, and typically that's okay too.
Assume that. Yeah.
I get really unnecessarily flustered for somebody who just asked me to film. Hello, Greta. I am filming you. You don't care. So I picked up the new Eva Baltasar yesterday, and I read it yesterday. It's very, very short, so it didn't take long, and I also had quite a lot of time to spend on the subway. I really liked it. I have previously read Permafrost and Boulder, her two other short novels, both of which are also translated by Julia Sanchez, much like Mammoth is, and it's very much the same type of book. We are following a kind of difficult protagonist who is lonely, self-secluding, but also kind of grappling with intimacy and what it means to be a human and an animal, to be a body, to be in the world, to have connections to people or not. I won't really go into plot. In some ways, it doesn't really matter. This is essentially the same protagonist as Permafrost and Boulder, both. I guess it's not literally exactly the same protagonist because it wouldn't make sense that that same woman couldn't have done all of those things, I think. But we are following a very similar person. A lot of this takes place in a secluded kind of pastoral area. The blurb on the back says it's very distinctly non-pastoral, and I agree. So this actually reminded me a lot of Marlen Haushofer's The Wall, because it's a woman with a dog, in fact, living alone a lot of the time. And this was rough in so many ways, much like Permafrost and Boulder are. I was chatting this morning and saying that this felt
harder and rougher than the previous two, but actually I think I might have simply softened those two. I'm not sure. If you have read this and if you've read all of Baltasar's books, let me know which ones are harder to deal with for you. But this was hard, and there's a relationship to the body for me especially that is visceral and super interesting, but also really, really difficult. So, you know, that's my slight caveat. Also, animal cruelty and just, it's stuff to deal with. Yes, I'm really glad that I read this. Now I have to go to work. Bye-bye. Hello, good evening. I was meant to go to another birthday party this evening, but I went home after I was done teaching. I subbed all day for somebody, and which was great. I really liked the students that I was working with today, but I was quite tired. So I decided it would be imprudent to go out and that I should just go home, eat pasta, maybe read, watch something, I don't know, but cocoon in some way. I have returned, as I said, to the Besieged city. I'm almost done, actually. I'm actually finally quite close to done. Nathan will discuss. I will be in touch with you. Actually, speaking of Nathan, he pointed out something I had not noticed, which is the soundscape of the Besieged city. And now that I have that in my eyes and in my ears, I agree with him. There is a lot of talk of the noise and the kind of ambient sound world of the Besieged city, which is interesting. I have talked about the Besieged city at some length from just the beginning few chapters in a previous vlog, and that remains the case. This is not going to be my favorite Lispector, and I think it probably is very few people's favorites. The kind of reviews that I've come across of it and the people I've asked have in general said, oh, you know, it was good, or it was fine, or it was okay, but usually they like another one more. In some ways, this is more conventional. It has more of a really conventional A to B to C plot line, certainly more than something like Passion According to GH, which has almost no plot, but it still is weird. And so that I think might be in some ways more frustrating for people. I think it has the potential to be more frustrating because it feels like it's going to be the story of a girl, young woman, kind of moving up in the world. And it sort of is that, but it's also written in a sort of tricky way and really contemplates, in my opinion, I think it still holds true to what I first read into it in the first few chapters, which is the making of oneself and objects and seeing and being seen, and the difference between subjectivity and objectivity as a narrative impulse as well. I think for me it's always impossible to remove Lispector from the equation. So why is she writing this story? And for me it is because she's really exploring the concept of narration and narrative, and of having a protagonist who is a subject versus a protagonist who is just an object. Lucrezia, the protagonist, kind of self-objectifies and has these aspirations of being so empty of an inner life that she is almost like an object that just sort of grows in hierarchy in the world. But it is also about the nascent inner life of Lucrezia and that kind of weird, awkward process. I like the parallels of her process and progress with her environment as well, both in terms of trinkets, little things around her, the objects, and then of course the city around her, which is also progressing. So there are all of these parallels of growth and expansion, but also kind of inner expansion. I'm thinking a lot about what it means to expand or to go up in the world. What's the difference between expansion versus kind of a like linear progress, and what does it mean in terms of insides, right? When you expand, can you expand while remaining hollow? What happens if you don't remain hollow? Can you grow from taking things from the outside? Can you kind of become like this black hole of selfness? Can you concentrate yourself? Can you expand while also filling yourself up on the outside? Do you need the outside world to fill yourself up? Can you create that matter that fills you up? I like the thought of matter, of physical matter, as well as intellectual matter or kind of conceptual matter of self and being. And I like the parallels that happen with talking about so many specific objects or about the city, because in this Lispector there are so many things that have a material presence, right? And also people. They have bodies, so they have a material presence, but then also their personhood is a non-material essence, but that also matters. So the physical and non-physical, material versus mattering are a lot of things that I'm thinking about. Do I want to mention anything else? Oh, I guess while I was talking about matter, I think that could be a reason why there is so much sound in the book, because sound is both nothing and also coming from things. So it is this non-specific or non-physical, it is specific rather, but non-physical thing, but it is physical because it is the movement of waves through space. I've talked about this before on this channel, but it inhabits this interesting half world between being material and matter and being immaterial. So that could be why there is such a rich soundscape in the Besieged city. That's a hypothesis. I recommend this as a book by a woman that is in translation if you're reading it in English or another non-Portuguese language. That was another note that I was going to add to finish off this vlog. I have various books for your August Women in Translation month as picks. So Mammoth by Eva Basar, translated beautifully by Julia Sanchez. I love this duo. Baltasar is a poet and writes sublimely, and Sanchez translates her absolutely sublimely. So I recommend all of her books for women in translation. I mean, look, I'm a huge Lispector stan, so I highly suggest her. As I've mentioned many times on this channel, I tend to prefer her in French, and I probably will reread this book at some point in French, but I also do love her work in English, so she's a good person to explore perhaps in Women in Translation month if you're not reading in Brazilian Portuguese. And this was not a woman in translation for me, but Jacqueline Harpman is indeed translated. I Who Have Never Known Men is translated into English, I know, and Orlanda is translated into English, and having recently finally discovered her work, I cannot say how she is in English, but in French she's great, and I think based on the hype that she's getting that she's also very good in translation. So here are some women in translation picks for you if you are trying to do that in August. That's it. I'm going to eat some pasta now. Bye.